Good evening, Houston. It is Tuesday, July 28th. I'm meteorologist Kim Castor, and here is your tropical update. So we are barely climbing up towards the peak of hurricane season. So we will be doing these daily until we get to the end of hurricane season, which isn't until November 30th. So we've got a long way to go. Remember, the peak is September 10th. We've had two named storms so far for the 2026 Atlantic hurricane season, Arthur and Bertha. These should definitely ring a bell because they formed in the Gulf. Next up on the list, Cristobal, Dolly, then Eduard, and then Faye. Although I do think it's going to take us some time to get to any more named storms. Why? Because in the short term, I am not tracking any development in the Atlantic Basin. Nothing is expected to form in the main development region. And it's because, yes, we've got some nice Saharan dust. So I am going to be tracking that moving off the west coast of Africa for tonight. And that's going to continue into this weekend. Nice dusty air chokes the storms out. So yes, storms look for warm sea surface temperatures like we've talked about. They also look for moist air in the vertical, and when there's dusty air, it's dry. So they don't have the tools to continue to develop. So it makes it very difficult for storm systems to get going. Not to mention, we've got a little extra wind that works in our favor, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But let's have a look at the sea surface temperature anomaly. So yes, technically the Atlantic Basin is running a couple degrees above what's average. However, I think there's a particular zone that catches your attention, definitely catches my eye, and that is along the equatorial Pacific. That spot is running very hot, and it's why the National Hurricane Center has given us the alert of not only are we in an El Nino phase, we will very likely go into a strong El Nino phase. And what that means is lots of activity is expected for the Pacific side. So let's break down what an El Nino pattern means. First and foremost, the globe always tries to find equilibrium, right? And so that is what fuels winds. We have the westerlies. South America has the trade winds. In any normal given year, trade winds push the warm water that's over the Pacific Ocean near the equator out towards Asia. That's what the trade winds do to try to even out atmospheric conditions. Now, if things are not balanced correctly, the trade winds weaken, and that warm sea surface water that would typically be in Asia actually stays in the equatorial region. South American boaters called this the El Nino because when they would fish way back when, and they noticed all the fish are dead, they thought it was an act of God. They thought it was Jesus, El Nino. That's where it gets its name from. Anywho, the warm sea surface temperatures that sit over the equator make it much more favorable for storm systems to develop because, yes, they have the fuel source. Now, weak trade winds, warm sea surface temperatures, what happens on the other side, the Atlantic Basin, which is, of course, what we're interested in? When there's that type of heat on this side, well, we tend to have slightly cooler sea surface temperatures in the Gulf and the Atlantic Basin, but more importantly, it has an impact on the wind. So let's talk about that. Trade winds weaken, our westerlies pick up in intensity as the counter effect, right? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And so because the winds are weaker on the southern hemisphere, they're a little bit stronger closer to home. The southern jet, which fuels our storm system, gets much more active. So with more wind shear, we get less storms. Why? Well, like we talked about, storms try to build in the vertical. They look for moist air and they look for calm conditions so they can do their thing. Think of a hurricane as a heat engine. So it needs a very specific exhaust to get going. Well, if that exhaust gets blown off with really strong wind shear, there's a much lessened chance for continued development. So we like to have those winds get going in the southern jet, in the westerlies for hurricane season. It means we tend to see less activity. So that's why we're not tracking anything over the next 7 days. Now, because it's an El Nino phase, the Pacific should be active, and well, it is. So we've got two systems that we're tracking in the Pacific Basin. Hurricane Genevieve, this has 130 mile an hour winds sustained, so it has increased in intensity from the last time I saw you around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It had technically weakened into a Cat 3 hurricane, which is still a major major hurricane, by the way, but it is even stronger this evening. It's got gusts at 160 miles an hour, and it is moving west-northwest at 9 miles an hour, but it is moving into no man's land. So no threat to the U.S. It is a fish storm. It will eventually lose some of its hottest temperatures that it's tapping into right now, which is what fueled its progression, its intensification. By tomorrow afternoon, it's back down to a Cat 3, eventually becomes a Cat 1, and then it becomes a tropical storm with winds falling below 74 miles an hour before the Cat 1 criteria, and it becomes a remnant low by this weekend. Then the second storm that we have been tracking is Tropical Storm Fausto. This is still giving us 50-mile-an-hour winds, so it's actually maintained its strength from this afternoon. The gusts are at 65 miles an hour, and it is moving west-northwest at 12 miles an hour. Now, this one is one that we are paying a little bit closer attention to because it technically, is close to the Hawaiian Islands. This is relative, though. This gives you a scope that is worth specifying. So about 300 miles away is where the center of circulation is, and about 200 miles away is where those outer bands are grazing the Hawaiian Islands. This is going to continue through Friday early morning at the latest. Now you'll notice that because it's a safe distance away from the Hawaiian Islands, the impacts are going to be minimal. I don't think that any travel plans will be impacted by this. If you were planning a last-minute Hawaiian vacation for summer, I don't think you'll have any issues. The wind, the rain shouldn't be increased by Tropical Storm Fausto. Now I will say, if you're a surfer and you were headed to Hawaii for that, it is definitely worth paying attention to the surf forecasts. The rip current risk is going to be high, especially for east-facing shores. There's just going to be a piling of wave effect that happens as Fausto moves through here. Now, if you are doing most of your surfing, say Friday, Saturday, then I think you should be fine. But if that's something you were hoping to do tomorrow or Thursday, it's worth paying attention to. So yes, lots to talk about in the Pacific, not so much in the Atlantic. This is very in line with the El Nino season that we have been tracking. Now, something else to note though, it doesn't mean that we don't see any storms close to home. In fact, the two named storms that we have had for the Atlantic hurricane season have been right in our backyard in the Gulf. So that's why it's important to check back in with us every night. So we'll see you back here again tomorrow night at 9 o'clock.